Hello students, after studying this module, you shall be able to define the term communication, describe the communication process, know the nature of communication, analyze the communication process, identify the flow of communication in organizations, and learn the methods of communication. The importance of communication. Communication pervades all the activities in an organization. No group or organization can exist without communication. It's through this process that the things get done in the organizations. The employees in workplace are continually involved in and affected by the communication process. Every manager needs to be an effective communicator. It's a critical skill due to which managers' planning, organizing and controlling functions become operationalized. As mentioned above, that in an organization's functioning, communication itself is unavoidable, but ineffective and faulty communication is avoidable. Everything a manager does communicate something in some way to somebody or some group. Indeed, research indicates that poor or ineffective communication is probably the most frequently mentioned source of interpersonal conflict. Because of its importance to organizational productivity and effectiveness, it becomes important to delve deeper into this topic. This would in turn provide us a clear understanding about the process of communication and also the task of becoming an effective communicator. Now coming to communication, its basic nature and process. Let's define the term communication and know its meaning. The term communication is derived from the word communis, which in Latin means common. It stands for the common activity of human beings of conveying opinions, feelings or information, etc. According to Keith Davis, communication is a process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. Communication is any behavior that results in an exchange of meaning. This was defined by the American Management Association. The process by which a person, group or organization, that is the sender, transmits some type of information, which is the message, to another person, group or organization is termed as communication. It is only through transmitting meaning from one person to another that information or ideas can be conveyed. Again, it must be clear that simple broadcasting of information cannot be labeled as communication. Rather, the receiver must have a clear understanding of what is conveyed. Secondly, we will discuss now about the communication process. Communication can take place only when there is a purpose and can be expressed as a message to be conveyed. It passes between a sender and a receiver. The message is first converted into a symbolic form. The process is known as encoding, and then it passes through some medium which is termed as the channel to the receiver. The receiver retranslates the message initiated by the sender, which is termed as decoding. Therefore, the final result is the transference of meaning from one individual to the other. Depicts this communication process. The key parts of this model are the sender, encoding, the message, the channel, decoding, the receiver, noise, and the feedback. The sender initiates a message by encoding a thought. From the sender's encoding emerges the actual physical product, which is the message. When we speak, the speech is the message. When we gesture, our facial expressions and body language are the message. The medium through which the message travels is the channel. It is the sender who decides which form of channel, either formal or informal, to use to transmit the message. The receiver is the object to whom the message is directed. Before the message is received and understood, the symbols must be first decoded or translated into an easily understandable form. This process is known as the decoding of the message. Noise represents the communication barriers that distort the clarity of the message. Examples of the possible noise sources are perceptual problems, information overload, semantic difficulties, or cultural differences. The final link in the communication process is the feedback loop. Feedback determines whether the sender's message has been understood well by the receiver as it was originally intended. Now coming to the next topic, that is the nature of communication. Communication firstly is a process. The term process has been defined as an identifiable flow of interrelated events moving over time towards some goal or an end. In other words, communication is a process in which there are some identifiable interrelated events which are initiated by the sender. This is followed by encoding messages through some channel till the receiver receives the message and ends the process with the feedback. Second is, communication is inevitable. Communication is essential, a physical, social, and psychological exercise. If an individual is provided all physical comforts but is not allowed to read, write, speak, and or listen, he will become mentally deficient. Third is, communication is meaning-based. As has been succinctly said by a specialist, the most immediate need of communication is to be able to refer to things in the real world. That is, to be able to name things, states, events, and attributes by using words. In addition, we must be able to link words together so as to create meaningful sentences and language. Hence, there is a need to be clear-headed about what we want to say. Fourth, communication could be intentional and unintentional. Communication takes place even when we do not plan it and when we are not conscious of it. We may communicate something that we had not intended to communicate. Fifth, communication is systematic. Every component of communication is affected by the other. The one who sends the message itself as well as the receiver of the message all are interrelated and affected by each other. Sixth, communication is a two-way traffic. There is no communication unless the message sent by the sender is not received by the receiver. Since the communication is an exchange of views, opinions, and directions, it involves both parties. George Terry has rightly said and remarked, simply talking or writing without regard to the recipient's response is conducive to creating a gross misunderstanding. Seventh, communication is a social process. Human being is a social animal. He cannot live in isolation. Communication is a process which helps human being to interact and socialize, making it a social process. Eighth, communication is a dynamic process. By dynamic we mean ever-changing. Communication is not constant or one-time event. It is a dynamic and ever-changing all the time. Ninth, communication is a continuous process. More often than not, it is repeated to achieve desired results. It is an ongoing process in which one interaction is followed by another. 10th, communication involves interaction and transaction. Participants of communication of exercise, exchange ideas and information besides influencing each other in the process. They share and exchange thoughts and meanings. 11th, communication is a spiraling process. Communication between the receiver and the sender usually does not start at the same level, nor does it grow at the same rate. This is due to the difference in the abilities of the sender as well as the receiver. Moreover, noise and time have an impact on it. As a result, communication takes a spiral stage before it gets completed and reaches the receiver at the same level and space. 12th, communication is contextual. Communication happens with reference to a particular context. The same words would mean different meanings if they are said in different context. Hence, meaning differ as per the situation. 13th, communication needs proper understanding. There may be numerous media of communication, but the main purpose of conveying the message is to create a proper understanding of the message in the mind of the other party. For this purpose, it should be clear and concisely worded. 14th, communication leads achievement of the organizational objective. Effective communication does this by creating a sense of object orientation in the organization. 15th, communication shares thoughts and ideas which produce response. Thoughts and ideas which do not produce a response do not come under the purview of communication. 16th, communication is the lifeblood of the business. No business organization and no civilized society can exist without the existence of an effective communication network. Through communication, people working in an organization get activated and involved in performing a variety of roles for achieving organizational goals. Various modes of communications are used for people outside to expose them to the existence, products, profit and progress of the organization. Now let's talk about the functions of communication. According to S.P. Robbins, in any group or organization, communication serves 4 vital functions, namely control, motivation, emotional expression, and information. First is the control function. In an organization, communication serves to control the behavior of members in several ways. In any workplace, there exists authority hierarchies and formal guidelines which each employee is expected to follow. Any job-related grievances or issues should be first communicated to the immediate boss or the supervisor. Similarly, employees are required to follow their job descriptions and abide by the rules and policies of the company. Here, one can conclude that communication is playing the control function. Informal communication can also control member behavior, like for instance, teasing or ridiculing a fellow employee who deviates from the group norms and in turn controlling his or her behavior. Second is the motivation function. Communication serves as a motivator to the employees by clarifying the goals to the employees, by giving them timely feedback of their performances, and also telling them what could be done to improve their performance if it's below a particular level. It doesn't end here. Communication is needed to reinforce desired behavior, which can again stimulate motivation in the members. Third, emotional expression. Since the employees spend maximum of their waking hours at the workplace, the work group becomes a vital source of social interaction. The communication that goes on within the group is a way through which employees vent out their feelings of frustration or satisfaction. In other words, communication serves as a mechanism to release the emotional expression of feelings and hence also the fulfillment of social needs. Fourth, information. Communication provides important information and data that are required by the individuals and the groups in order to facilitate the decision-making process in the organization. This is done through transmitting the data to identify and evaluate alternative choices. Information consists of facts, figures, and data arranged in a pattern which are useful for different purposes. Example, list of names, address and telephone numbers of customers, etc. Information is very necessary in an organization as it reduces uncertainty about the situation or the environment. It helps an employee to get acclimatized to the rules, regulations, norms, and culture of an organization. None of the above mentioned functions must be considered more important than the other. Each of these is equally important for effective functioning of a group or an organization. Now let's talk about the direction of communication. Communication can flow vertically or laterally. The vertical dimension can further be classified into downward and upward communication. Exhibit 19.2 illustrates the direction of communication flow in an organization. First is the downward communication. Communication that flow from one level of a group or an organization to a lower level is known as the downward communication. When managers communicate with employees, it's usually downward communication. Downward communication is used by the team leaders and managers to assign goals, provide job instructions, inform employees of various policies and procedures, point out problems which seek their attention, and also to provide valuable feedback about performance. It's not mandatory for downward communication to always be oral or face-to-face contact. When a team leader sends a reminder email to the members of the team, reminding them of an upcoming deadline, he or she is using downward communication. Some other examples of downward communication are group or mass distributed emails, job instructions, official memos, policy statements, procedures, manuals, and company publications. The second is upward communication. Upward communication flows to a higher level in the group or organization. It's used to provide feedback to the higher ups, inform them about the progress towards the goals, and also throw light upon the current problems. Through upward communication, managers become aware about how employees feel about their jobs, co-workers, and the organization in general. Managers can rely upon upward communication for ideas on how things can be improved. Some examples of upward communications are the suggestion boxes, employee attitude surveys, grievance procedures, etc. Next is the lateral communication. When communication takes place among the members of the same work group, among members of work groups at the same level, among managers at the same level, or among any horizontally equivalent personnel, we describe it as a lateral communication. Despite the effectiveness of vertical communication, we need lateral or horizontal communication in order to save time and facilitate coordination. Since strict adherence to the formal vertical structure for all communication can impede the efficient and accurate transfer of information, lateral communication can be very beneficial. In such a situation, lateral communication occurs with the knowledge and support of the superiors, but can create dysfunctional conflicts when the formal vertical channels are breached. Now let's talk about interpersonal communication. Verbal communication. People essentially rely upon two basic communication methods in order to transfer meaning between and among each other. They are the verbal communication, which can be either oral and written, and non-verbal communication. First, let's talk about the oral communication. The most important way of conveying messages is oral communication. Group discussions and formal one-on-one discussions, speeches, and the informal rumor mill or grapevine are popular forms of oral communication. Oral communication is generally preferred because of its speed and feedback. A verbal message can be conveyed and a response received in least possible time orally. If the message is not clear to the receiver, rapid feedback allows for early detection by the sender, which in turn allows for early correction. The major drawback of oral communication is when the message has to pass through a number of people. Chances are fair that distortions may occur, and by the time the message content reaches the final destination, it's quite different. Now let's come to the written communication. Written communication includes fax transmissions, letters, memos, electronic mail, instant messaging, organizational periodicals, notices placed on the bulletin boards, or any other device that is transmitted via written records or symbols. The biggest strength of using written communication is its tangibility and verifiability. When printed, both the sender and the receiver have a record of the communication, and the message can be stored for indefinite period. Also, a written record can be referred to at a later period of time when need arises. A final benefit of all written communication comes from the process itself. One is usually more careful with the written word than the oral word. Written communications are more likely to be well thought out, logical, and clear. Of course, written messages do have their own drawbacks. Firstly, it's time consuming as compared to oral communication. Oral communication allows receiver to respond rapidly to what he thinks he hears. However, written communication does not have an inbuilt feedback mechanism. One cannot be sure that the email sent is received, and if received, there is no guarantee that the receiver would interpret it as the sender intended. The non-verbal cues are absent in written communication. Now let's talk about the non-verbal communication. The discussion of communication shall be incomplete if we don't consider non-verbal communication, which includes body movements, the intonation or emphasis we give to words, the facial expressions, and the physical distance between the sender and the receiver. For instance, in a party, a glance, a smile, a frown, and a provocative body movement all convey meaning. Body language adds to and often complicates verbal communication. When non-verbal communication is combined with oral communication, it gives a fuller meaning to the sender's message. Facial expressions, for instance, also convey meaning, and similarly, intonations can change the meaning of a message. Even physical distance or the ways individuals space themselves has meaning. Thus, communication shall be effective only when both verbal and non-verbal communication go hand in hand and in consonance. If a verbal message is conveying something, while the non-verbal gestures and facial expressions are conveying something very opposite, this would lead to contradictions and in turn may misinform others. Now let's finally come to the summary. Effective communication plays a key role in enhancing the success of management functions in an organization. Communication helps in controlling, motivating employees, aids in emotional expressions, and also provide requisite information to enable decision making. Communication can flow in either downward, upward, or horizontal directions. Verbal communication is essentially of two kinds, oral and written communication. The oral communication, which is a part of verbal communication, is generally preferred because of its speed and feedback. And lastly, both verbal and non-verbal communication, when in consonance, can make communication effective.